And so that's the thing that holds most people back, is that the program we have, right, our subconscious is really designed to do one thing, which is to protect you from anything that can hurt you, and things like your ego get involved, where it's rejection, issues, challenges, fear, failure. All this stuff can happen if you do that, and so your mind is ultimately in the background doing what? Protecting you, holding you back.
Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years. Our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
Who knows how far we are in the year right now?
Month. 32 days, 33 days.
Basically 10%. 9.41% all the way through 2025, which is crazy, right? So it doesn't feel like it's even all the way that far, but I did the math this morning, looked it up. 9.41% based on just a website that tracks it for you. And so if you think about it, most people are still stuck in, most people are doing pretty good, but a lot of people are actually still operating like it's Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday still. They haven't even got to 2025 mode where they're crushing it because they're still in the hangover from the Christmas holidays, right? Which is a massive problem. And so it comes down to really two main things, right? Their mindset and their behavior, which is super important. And so we want to talk about how we get through that, and obviously how to make sure that we're optimized for 2025. And I want to make sure that we guys are really aligned with who you want to be in 2025. We did our goals. We did our quarterly goals. We did that. But some people just aren't fully on fire like they need to be. And it's super important to go back and just kind of realize, hey, what's the version of me that's going to nail those goals, not just 2025, but also 2026. And I'll talk about something that we went through in my coaching group. But there's a number that's 93%. And it has to do with our life. Anybody want to take a guess what that is? That number is 93%. Give me one or two guesses. Has to do with your life and how you make decisions.
Subconscious.
Close, yep, that's part of it. What about it?
93% of decisions are subconsciously made. Not just guessing.
That was my guess too. It's very close. So there's a study between two different places, Harvard Medical School and Johns Hopkins University, to study two obviously leading educational platforms in the world for medical school. In the combined research, they found 93% of the actions that you take are a conditioned response. What does that mean? 93% of the actions you take are a conditioned response. What does that mean, you think?
They're consistent with all of your last responses.
With your what?
They're consistent with all of your last responses. You're not going to change.
Yeah, so it's conditioned with one thing, our programming. If you break it down, so if I go home at night after a long day and have a drink, it's not because I really want to have a drink. What is it really? I've conditioned myself that that's how I react to that, right? It's something I was just looking back and reviewing this. And so where does most of this programming come from?
Your upbringing?
Yes, your childhood, right? Years 1 through 7. And I'll talk about why this is important. It's kind of building up through. So all this comes from our programming as a child. So 93% of the way that we react to things like money, things like business, things like success, things like stress, right, all come down to how we're programmed in our upbringing, specifically usually the childhood, which is crazy. So the way you look at money, the way you look at success, the way you look at your temperature in terms of how you show up and do things, all come from the programming that we've had our entire upbringing, right? And there's stories like what your parents may have said about money, what they said about rich people, right? All that stuff, your pastor, coaches, teachers, all that stuff programmed you and created what you talked about, your subconscious, which we've all trained out about before, right? Is what's driving what?
Behavior.
What type of behavior?
Decisions.
Yep. And specifically what?
Unconscious.
93% of the that you do is all driven by your subconscious. So you ever been to like where you cut your computer off at a Windows computer, you cut it off at the end and the thing pops up with all the programs running that you didn't even know were running? Right? You ever done that where you cut it off and it says, hey, do you want to shut this program? It's like go to meeting, Zoom, all this stuff that's running in the background you didn't know is running. Right? That's how you're operating, you're not even knowing it. And that's the crazy part about it, is you think that you're in control, but ultimately 9 times out of 10 the decision you make is always subconscious. And so the only way to get around that is through what? Reprogramming. How do you do that?
Positive thoughts and actions.
So the number one scientific way to do that is through affirmations. Which is what? Reprogramming through words how I show up and how I do that in terms of how I operate, right? And so that's something that's important to do. And there's no really bad or good programming. There's just two types of programming. I taught this a while ago. Number one is effective. Number two is ineffective. So we don't look at it as good or bad, right? Because the way we brought up, the way we went through things, developed who we are and the strength that we have. A lot of times it comes down to the stories that we attach to them, right? So if I have effective programming, that does what?
Works.
Gets me what I want. Ineffective programming doesn't get me what I want. And in many cases, holds me back. And so one of the biggest reasons that we're held back and we're stuck in where we feel like we're stuck comes down to what? Ineffective programming. You guys with me on this? And the craziest part about it is that we don't even know it's running, which is holding us back. And so that's the key part there. We have to sometimes recognize that we have negative conditioning from family, friends, pastors that stand in the way of us moving forward, which is important, right? And why is that? Well, your mind doesn't care about your goals. It's crazy to think about, right? So mind doesn't care about the goals. What do you think that means?
Reprogramming doesn't have an opinion.
Deeper than that, it's a little bit different. But our mind doesn't care about your goals. Why?
It just wants to survive.
What's that?
It wants to survive.
The only thing that your mind does, the only thing that your mind cares about is what? Survival. That's it. So now, if your mind's number one goal is survival, what happens to things when they're uncomfortable? It shuts down and tells you not to do it, right? So your mind is designed to give you comfort. Why? Because all the mind wants to do is one thing. Allow you to survive so you can do what? Live and procreate and further on the species. That's it. And so that's the thing that holds most people back, is that the program we have, right, our subconscious is really designed to do one thing, which is to protect you from anything that can hurt you, and things like your ego get involved, where it's rejection, issues, challenges, fear, failure. All this stuff can happen if you do that. And so your mind is ultimately in the background doing what? Protecting you, holding you back. And so that was true, potentially thousands of years ago, when it was a lot more different society. But in this case, right, you want to make sure that I can access the power and the ability to push outside my comfort zone so that I can make sure I get where I want to go. You guys with me on this? And so it's important to look at that piece of that, which is important, right? And so all change that we have in our life comes outside our comfort zone. You guys with me on this? I'm setting up, obviously, for the important reason of what we're doing, why we're doing it. So that's the key part. Just realize the conditioning that you have will put you down 93% of the time. And it's just because of what things are. And here's the crazy part to talk about too, is that 93% of your actions are just running your subconscious. And so what we don't realize is how many of you grew up with super successful parents that taught you affirmations when you grew up in the mornings and talked about how bad you were and how successful you're going to be? None. Right? So it's crazy to think about, right? Do we all want our kids to be successful if you have kids? Yep. Do we think that we can help that by programming them to have the right thought process? Right? But not one single person in here had that upbringing of what? Very successful parents who taught us how to think. And so that was kind of a big shock for me to think about. And my parents never did that. Why? Because they were just trying to do what? Survive. And they're going their survival based on their parents who came up through the Great Depression. And when things were very difficult and bad, they were trying to do what? Survive. And so for us to have the ability to break that generational curse in many cases, we have to have the ability to think differently and be able to program ourselves differently. Why? To break that chain. Right? Grandparents, great-grandparents, parents, and then you, and obviously it goes backwards, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and then you, usually in the same line. Unless you grew up in a super wealthy family where they taught you how to think, and obviously no one in here did that, including myself. And so think about how, number one, you can change you, but when you have your children, how powerful that is to make sure that you can help them program themselves through what? Affirmations, what they speak, and things like that. You guys with me on this? And so I want to help us do that overall with that. And so here's the thing I want you to write down. Disciplines and routines will always beat motivation. Discipline and routines will always beat motivation. What does that mean, you think? I mean, you can't outrule your environment, right? And so if I can build the disciplines and routine, it helps obviously overcome the feeling and it looks like you guys talked about that last week a little bit, of motivation. And so I want to talk about how that happens and how we do that. And so what's the best way for us to do that? Number one, you have to have a vision of who you want to be and where you want to be, right? So if I have a vision of who I want to be and how they make decisions and what their disciplines are, guess what happens to my decisions? They have a higher chance of getting made differently, right? Number two, I'll make sure I have an avatar of who that person is. What does that mean, you think?
Envision the person you want to be.
Envision that person you want to be, and I'll talk a little bit differently about it. I have specifics of how that person behaves, their disciplines, their behaviors. Oh, sorry, I just wrote that one. Behaviors, disciplines, routines, and decision making. And then at that point, what do you think I do?
But I can be that person.
I'll start working on reprogramming.